Thank you very much, Mr. Kahangire, for once again giving us the opportunity to speak to you about the progress of Nile Cooperation. Kindly help us understand how this process started.
Okay, thank you for talking to me again. Maybe let me give you a background as Uganda. We have had, since the beginning of the 20th century, a close cooperation between the Egyptian government, the colonial government, and the Uganda government. So the colonial government was very, very keen to strengthen the water resources management because they had also interest in strengthening their cooperation with Egypt for the sake of negotiations on their vested interest on the water resources and the general politics in the Nile Basin. Then later on, for instance, the British colonial government is the only country which had a hydrological advisor to the governor, showing that the water resources was so important to the colonial government and the government of Uganda that they had an advisor advising on how water resources and their management are concerned. So when we moved from there, in between 61 and 64, there was a lot of rain in the region. The Lake Victoria levels rose by over 3 meters, and all the water in the Nile River the volumes were very high. The Tiaba port was inundated. The ports around Kisumu and even the Port Bell were submerged. So at the same time, Egypt had already constructed Aswan High Dam, but when they received so much rain over that period, they started wondering whether they had made enough provision in case that Aswan High Dam was overtopped. So that starting from about 65, the Egyptian government, the Sudan government, Uganda government, Kenya and Tanzania started working together and asked the UNDP, and later on working together with the World Meteorological Organization to study and understand how the water of the Nile River and the causes of the high rains.
Okay.
So, because that cooperation, that's starting of the hydromet survey, that was the beginning of planning for the hydromet survey project, which became effective in 1968. Actually, 67 and 68 was inaugurated at Entebbe again. So we had a cooperation between the governments of Sudan, Egypt, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda.
Okay.
Together with UNDP and the World Meteorological Organization, they set up the first hydrometeorological survey of the lakes Victoria, Choga, and Albert. In short, hydromet survey project.
Okay.
That was, I think, was the first beginning of a broader cooperation covering more than one country, or beyond the cooperation that Uganda and Sudan and Egypt had started.
Okay.
Yes.
What were the outcomes now that the survey has been launched? How did it progress, and what were its conclusions?
Yes, so we spent a lot of time and effort strengthening the hydrometeorological network. The network for observing rainfall and the networks for observing water flows in the various tributaries of the Nile. So that means also intensifying the network. For instance, Uganda had a network over the lakes and rivers, but this had been intensified so that it can be later on use the data in a model. So the data collection was done. People were trained. We had people from the region who actually had little knowledge and experience in water resources, hydrology, and such studies. So we had strengthening of manpower, we had strengthening of the networks, we had strengthening of the technical people that were in the field taking measurements. We had also benefited from personnel and professions coming from different countries with different expertise and knowledge. And also the international community, like from the World Meteorological Organization, brought in experienced hydrologists and water resources experts.
Fast forward to 1999, NBI is established.
Yes.
How did you feel after so many years of hard work?
Well, it was rewarding. It was rewarding because particularly Uganda had been consistent in all efforts of cooperation. And maybe I should also indicate why, because we thought that Uganda, being the middle state, you have the source, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and Kenya, and then all bringing water in the Lake Victoria. And Uganda is at the exit, at the control. So, and then thereafter, the other countries, Sudan and Egypt, are all the time they consider themselves as honorary recipients. And for a long time, we are getting a lot of cooperation and pressure from Egypt and Sudan. And yet, as developments continue and population increases, we are anticipating also there will be going to be a lot of pressure from other countries because they also want to use the water of the Nile for development. So Uganda was in the middle, and we continue to play a coordination role and make sure that we don't lose interest of whatever has been. So being part of that effort at the country level and at the technical level, I was happy to see us develop now, having attracted more donors and partners, and also having attained a more predictable cooperation among the countries. So by forming the Nile Basin Organization, we are, for the first time, getting also a leadership at the level of the Nile Basin. So it was good and predictable, and we were happy to attain that position.
During your tenure, and perhaps even before, what are some of the critical projects that NBI and member countries wanted to achieve? What was the dream?
Well, the dream was the first and foremost. Remember, there was, and it has been documented for many years, that Egypt had a veto power on the use of the Nile waters. So many countries wanted to get projects that would either use water for hydropower or irrigation as the major consumptive uses. Yes. And so irrigation, hydropower, And later on, of course, you can generate hydropower. You need power interconnection. We also remember, because of the silent veto power of Egypt, more donors were not happy to support development in the Upper Nile countries without consent of Egypt. So that forming the NBI enabled us now create a forum where that projects can be discussed, and anybody who wants to have has a views or objections can be answered in that forum, and that's what is happening. Most of the time, it's hydropower development projects. The irrigation are still not at a level that will significantly reduce or influence the waters of the Nile.
Okay. Right
Of
now,
course, in addition to that, we needed to build capacities. So the projects like what we started with, we had energy, we had training and research, we had irrigation, we had confidence building, because in order to broaden the cooperation beyond governments and a few taken people, we needed to bring more people. So in that way, we were able to bring NGOs, to bring members of parliament, and the academia. They are all involved now, research organization. Then there was, of course, the issue of environment. So environment project was key, and I think it was one of those with the highest, the biggest budget, because the environment is an issue of concern for all the river basin countries.
Okay.
And of course, in addition to that, we had the cooperative framework, developing a framework of cooperation, legal, that now countries can use it as a forum and build confidence that participation or development of the Nile River waters in the various countries will not be constrained.
Okay.
Yes.
Right now, countries are undertaking, Uganda particularly, is undertaking a number of hydropower projects along the Nile.
Yeah.
Would you consider this rapid process as an outcome, as one of the benefits or the results of the cooperative framework? In other words, have we managed to convince Egypt?
I think if you look at the progress on the cooperative framework, already more than six countries had already signed, and if the 6 countries could ratify, in any way that means the agreement comes in force. But more so, a lot of effort has gone into building a framework of cooperation that goes beyond governments. Even it touches the individuals. We have projects that touch individuals. So I think also the development of the water schemes, irrigation, power schemes on the Nile, not only in Uganda but even in Ethiopia. We have the biggest power project in Ethiopia. I think all these have been enabled to some extent by the Nile Basin, because it forms a framework, and we say instead of each individual contacting Egypt or any country for permission, we now present it to the NBI, and this NBI to inform other countries. So that makes it easy. We don't have to have conflict among the countries, because the forum enables the countries now to discuss. Yeah.
Unlike Egypt's earlier apparent overwhelming openness including during the hydromet survey. During the course of the CFA negotiations, they have tended to withdraw. Why do you think that has been the case?
Well, first, negotiating on water. Water, you see, today you have 84,000 cubic meters of water. Tomorrow there is drought, and that flow can come almost to zero. You have seen it in our own rivers. So agreements or concerning a resource on which nobody has control. Nobody has control except God. It makes it difficult, and some countries jittery. So there's a general fear of the unknown on matters concerning water resources. Then I think because Egypt has had for long been viewed as the sole owner with a veto power, I think now to realize that other countries now, the population has grown, and they need also water in their own respective countries. I think they are willing to allow that use of water without formally consenting that they have lost veto power.
So it's a bit political.
It's political. Yeah. And really, technically, there's no harm, because the moment you cooperate and you work together, recognizing you have a shared resource, then whenever there's a problem, you sit together and you find best solutions that can satisfy all our needs. So for instance now, if you construct a hydropower scheme and there's a dam on it, some water is retained, it creates a reservoir, and that reservoir, if there's constraint in another country, as we have Lake Victoria and others, Ethiopia is constructing a hydropower scheme that basically is consuming all the flow of the Blue Nile. Annual flow of the Blue Nile is going to be retained. So with that kind of water at upstream, that can facilitate and help the water requirements in downstream countries like Ethiopia, like Sudan and Egypt. So I think technically they should have no fear. I think the fear is just political, and maybe we give them time, they will come along and also realize that working together gives us better options rather than putting obstacles to use of water in the respective member countries' boundaries.
Of course, going back to your experience, personal experience, what were some of the achievements, the outstanding achievements that you recorded during your tenure at the NBI?
I think during the NBI, the main achievement, because when we created the NBI and the various donors came on board, we developed the Nile Basin Action, an action plan, and which was activity to be done across the basin. And also, we also developed action plans for sub-regions. And in this case, we had two sub-regions, the Kagera and the Blue Nile. But so we had activities which were broad to be executed in the basin countries, and that included power development, power studies, capacity building, environment, all those were done across the basin. And we had actually a budget of more than $200 million. Then we had sub-basin projects. Those were intended to be development projects that will create impact in the sub-regions. So, for instance, the Sumo hydropower scheme, which is now under construction, was envisaged and planned for as under the sub-basin of And so I think I left when that implementation of those projects were still going.
Okay.
Yeah. And later on, I think more projects have been added on. They have done atlas for the Nile Basin for the first time, for population studies, irrigation studies across the basin. So a number of studies and projects have been implemented, out of which these studies, real projects can be formed and implemented.
Okay. And perhaps lastly, what do you see as challenges going forward?
The challenge
facing the Nile Cooperation. Yes.
The challenge is of course there's a lot of donor funding required, because it is not that easy to put a project in the Nile at the country level. So although at the NBI level countries are contributing, after now the contribution have contributed to be substantial, but that is small compared to the projects. The Sumo alone is about more than $100 million. So the participation and the collection of member countries is inadequate for the kind of projects and funding levels required. So the donor support, and as usual, donor support sometimes is not predictable. Sometimes it's conditioned to political situations, to issues in their respective countries. So I think that continuing to receive adequate donor support may be a problem. The other one is, of course, the capacity of the governments, so that they bring the necessary capacities to implement projects, to plan and implement projects. So that also, I think, almost in all countries, there are skills constraints. So that can also is going to be continuing to be an issue for some time, until we have competence is developed.
You mean
competence.
Translating the knowledge that has been
Yes,
generated.
Particularly implementing. You can easily to implement the own false dam. The project is here, the water is in Uganda, but now when you want to plan a project that involves more than 3 countries, 4 countries, the Sumo involves 3 countries, Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, and Tanzania. Others, you need more than 2 countries. So that requires a different level of planning and implementation. Yeah, so that's why I'm saying. The other one, of course, is countries can be also, I don't know, in quote, board. So you start a project or an organization, there's a lot of excitement, but if that excitement and anticipated projects are not realized, then some politicians may lose interest. So the moment they lose interest, then it also affects the funding. So also the countries, the continued interest and participation of the countries is important.
What's your proposal on addressing fatigue among members?
No, I think one is, of course, continued engagement, that the various important organs continue to be engaged. The other one is, of course, that we have continued to make the participation go beyond meetings. That also now even politicians can have a better appreciation of the complexities and what it requires to implement a regional project. But I think above all, the most challenge is getting the cooperative framework endorsed and that starts to take effect, and all countries respect it and respect the organizations that would have been formed and organs that would have been formed to implement that cooperative
In your view, finally, in your view, how will the cooperative framework change the way Nile resources are shared?
Yeah, because it will give a strong organization which has the capacity to go in each member state and inquire, which has the capacity also to have legal arm that should there be differences of opinion or concerns, even with the legal and political arm, they can address it. Because a weak organization is constrained. But if the organization is strong and all these organs are functioning, then I think they will be able to bring on board and ensure compliance, because that is important. You can have an agreement, but if the member countries don't respect it and there is no penalty, then the countries will behave the way they want to behave.
Any concluding remark?
Well, as for me, and I think I speak also for Uganda, I think the journey has been rewarding. We had issues where interest becomes low, and as usual, not all countries can have the same interest. And certainly, Uganda has a higher level interest in cooperation on the Nile. Strengthen the cooperation. That will make it easy for all countries to be involved in the development of the water resources, and not putting, none of them putting a deliberate pressure on Uganda as having control over the exit of the Lake Victoria. So I think that, and also we have benefited, I have personally benefited from interaction with various professional, political. I developed very good relationship with my police ministers. Yeah, and the technical, and also it has given me that credibility. It enabled me to build capacity so that I can be useful to my country. And I'm sure I'm not alone, because if I see where I started from, by the way, when I joined Uganda government, I was the first professional trained in hydrology, with the first degree in hydrology. So now when I see the capacity that has been created in Uganda alone, I remember when I joined Uganda government, there was one irrigation engineer in water development and maybe one or two in the agriculture. But now, quite a number of people are capable of offering services and are qualified to do that. So I think that has been a rewarding, looking back at where I started from, to the skills-wide level and the expertise that is available now in this country, and also in other countries whose development and skilling could not have been attained to the level without cooperation on the Nile. Yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.